So consumer surplus under P star Q star, it's the difference between demand and price over the range of consumption, so it's A, B, C, and D. Producer surplus is the area between price and private marginal costs, right, over the range of production, so it's E, F, G, H. I actually need one more. Pizza slice here. Okay, here we go. Here comes the hard part. Ready? Are we done? Right, or is there some other loss or gain to society from producing Q star units? There's a loss, right? And that loss is, if you produce Q star units right here, what are you doing? Well, yes, you're generating consumer surplus of A, B, C, and D. You're generating producer surplus of E, F, G, and H like before. But what you're also doing is you are producing Q star units. And for each unit, you generate marginal external cost dollars worth of externalities, which are borne by society, right? It might not be your kid that's getting sick from the consumption of this power, but it's somebody's kid. And we all care about somebody's kid. We should, right? So the point here is for the first unit, you have this external cost. I think we called it $5 earlier. Second unit, third unit, fourth unit, fifth unit, sixth unit, seventh unit, stop it, max. I get it, right? So all the way out to Q star, for each unit produced, we produce MC externals worth of damages. So total damages caused by the production activity are Q star times whatever this flat marginal external cost curve is here. So we have external costs of H, J, plus K, this whole rectangle right here. Don't write that in your table, even though you just did, okay? So at Q star, you have H plus J plus K in external costs. You ready for some geometry? You thought you were done with geometry once you handed in your SATs, right? Nuh-uh. Okay. Is there another area on here that might be more convenient that has the same area as H, J, and K? Okay. All you all are really good at like dragging and dropping stuff on computers because you have these fancy machines. Right, so what if I kept these 2 points pinned here, and I picked up this area right here, these 2 points, and I kept them exactly this distance apart, and without cheating, moved up. Wait, I should do some yoga. Here we go. Right? What happens? Whoa. Right? The distance between my marginal external cost and the origin, by definition, is the exact same distance as that between social marginal cost and social private cost. So the area, if I just move this thing up and keep this thing constant, what am I doing? I'm generating an area that starts at this point, goes down to here, to up here. So this trapezoid area right here, that is H, F, C, D, G, and L, has exactly the same area by design as H, J, and K. Right? So I'm going to write my external costs for a reason that will be obvious in a second in terms of this trapezoid area rather than this rectangle right here. Both answers would be right, but it's just clearer if we do it with that thing. So external costs here, they're negative. They're losses to society. So I'm going to say minus C, minus D, minus L, minus G, minus F, minus H. Okay? So we lose C, D, L, G, F, and H. So total welfare for the society at Q star is A plus B plus C plus D plus E plus F plus G plus H, minus C, okay, so I'm going to cancel this C out here, minus D, I cancel this D out here, minus L, that's not in here, minus G, minus F, minus H. Okay? So total welfare here is going to be A plus B plus E, A plus B plus E minus L. That's welfare at Q star. Now let's go crazy and go to the point where Max said society is better off. Q double star. You ready? No, you're not, but we'll do it anyway, okay? Q double star. Now this green thing here is my quantity, and P double star is my price. So consumer surplus is going to be easy. Area below demand above P double star, so that's just going to be A. Producer surplus is the area between supply, private marginal cost, the new higher price, right? And, over the range of production here. So it's going to be P plus C plus E plus F, B, C, E, F, and H. What are my external costs now? Let's do the rectangle first. It's easier, right? I'm now producing Q double star. External costs of red line for each unit. So total external costs are height of this rectangle times its width. So it's going to be H plus J. If I pick up these 2 points and keep these pinned down here, and I pull this up, I get a trapezoid that's going to be C, Charlie, Frida, and Harry, right? C, F, and H in terms of total external costs. Minus C, minus F, minus H. So in terms of total welfare, what I'm going to get is A plus B plus C plus E plus F plus H minus C, minus F, minus H. So what I'm getting then in terms of total welfare, wow! Max, this is incredible. I knew that this has to be true, but finally you showed me. Externalities are bad for society. They're really bad for society, right? There's deadweight loss here in the amount of L. Right? That's the deadweight loss from the externality. Yes? The length of this line from here to here, if you remember Pythagoras, right? Clearly isn't the same, right? So that's basic. That's geometry, right? That I'm happy to discuss this, how the rectangle and this thing have the same area, but you're just going to have to believe me that they do. All right? I'm happy to do this, but believe me for now, because otherwise we're not going to get to where I want to get to. So I apologize. I hate not answering questions, but that one I'm going to call not going to do it. All right. So here, what we've got now is we've got something impressive, right? So if we leave these firms to do whatever it is they want to do all by their lonesome, they would produce Q star. Right? Perfectly competitive firms in the past, if we left them all by their lonesome and they produce Q star where private marginal cost is equal to demand, right, or supply equals demand, that maximizes welfare. Here, I leave these firms alone to produce Q star, and they're producing a quantity that's not maximizing social welfare, right? So here what you need is if you leave firms alone and you have a negative externality as a market failure right here, these firms produce more than is socially efficient, because the socially efficient point here is Q double star. Right? So by leaving firms to do what they do without interfering in the market, firms would produce more than is socially optimal, right? And we should somehow incentivize them to reduce their production levels. All right? So that's the finding. The question is, how do we get there? Right, so I just put something in red here. I've never in this class put anything in red before, but I think this is important. Right? For the externality right here, and I've said all of this stuff here, but this is a summary of my babblings over the past 15 minutes, is the private market, or firms and consumers left alone here, will produce too much pollution, and it's not socially optimal, right? So there is a role for government intervention in this particular market to somehow get firms to produce less than they would if you left them alone. All right. So we could talk about policy for decades, and people will talk about policy for decades, but there's essentially two types of policies that we as regulators use in order to incentivize firms to produce less than what they would do in the absence of such policy. So there's so-called price incentives, and we will see these in a second. These are emissions taxes, where you charge essentially a specific tax per unit of pollution produced. Sometimes it's called a fee. It's the exact same thing. Its advantage is it's not called a tax, because the word tax is political poison. Sometimes, in places where politicians have figured out that fee is just a tax, we call it an effluent charge, right? It doesn't sound like tax, but it's just a tax. There's also something called a cap-and-trade system, and we will get into that soon, which is a tradable permits market, which is also a price mechanism where you place a price on pollution in a very specific way. The less effective way of regulating pollution in terms of a cost perspective is standards, where you simply put an emissions standard on and you say, firm A, you may not produce more pollution than a certain amount. Turns out that's a very, very costly way of reducing emissions, or even worse, you tell firms what technology to use, right? The government picks what emissions reduction technology you have to use, and that's what firms have to use. The government historically has not been great at picking technologies, with some exceptions, but overall, the market's been better at picking technologies. So command and control policies, where we tell firms what to do instead of sending price signals in markets, they come in three flavors. One is emission standards, where you simply tell a firm they can emit a certain amount and no more. If they emit more than the amount, they pay a fine, right? So it's sort of like you tell your kid you may have 2 cookies after dinner, and if you catch them with the 3rd cookie, they pay a fine. No bedtime stories, right? Only in the real world. That's a bad fine, by the way. If your parents ever the bedtime story, don't do that as a fine. Do something else, right? Stories are important. But back on track here. There's a fine. It's usually dollar terms or prison, right? Input standards are slightly different, where instead of saying you may emit a certain amount, you simply tell firms what they get to use for production. So, for example, you could outlaw high sulfur coal and require power plants to use low sulfur coal. Or you could tell truck drivers they no longer get to use high sulfur diesel, they only get to use low sulfur diesel. So you're regulating what type of inputs of production goes into production. The last types of standards are technological standards, where you tell firms what to do. For example, if you want to reduce the emissions of NOx from power plants, we require you to have scrubbing technology, right? So the firms don't get to choose what they use. An inspector comes in and sees whether the technology is on your firm. We also did this for cars. We required catalytic converters in cars, which was actually a successful choice, but you prescribe a technology. Now, there's this stuff here alone. Today's lecture, you can take a whole class on, right? This single slide here is enough for 5 weeks of economics. So there's something called environmental economics, which teaches you all of this stuff. And these classes are taught in the EAP major on campus here. So if you like this stuff, head over there or hit me up and I'll point you to some classes. But the requirements in order for this type of regulation to actually work well and be cost effective, the regulator must know exactly how much it costs firms to reduce their emissions. Firms will never truthfully report how much it costs them to reduce emissions. So we've seen this in certain policies where ex ante before the policy, firms were sort of yelling it's going to cost us this much to reduce emissions, and then afterwards it actually cost them 1/10, right? So firms have a huge incentive to exaggerate, and the regulator never knows what the true cost of emissions abatement is. So why taxes, right? I don't know if I can say taxes any more times in a slide. We don't always love taxes, right? We don't like taxes in perfectly competitive markets, but we do love taxes when there are negative externalities. And let me show you the genius behind something called Pigouvian taxation. This is, to me, one of the greatest pieces of economic insight ever, and it's got a cool name. Please, on the exam, don't call it Peruvian taxation. It's named after a French economist named Pigou, not after the country of Peru, okay? And he's not Peruvian. So let's look at this. So same picture as before. We have a marginal benefit curve, right? And then we have our private marginal cost curve. Then we have an external marginal cost curve. And then we have the social marginal cost curve, which looks something like this. It's just a supply curve plus the supply curve plus the external marginal cost. So we know that firms left alone will produce here, Q star, P star, but we want them to produce right here. Don't yawn. Your yawn made me so insecure I turned, aw. That's your yawn's fault, right there. I know you're tired. I'm tired too, but I don't yawn at you. Okay, so this quantity right here is what firms will do if you leave them alone. This is what we want them to do. This is the price if you leave them alone. This is what we want price to be. The million-dollar question is, how do I get firms from point A to point B? Right? So firms will produce A. Well, how do I get them to point B? I could just say, you got to produce Q double star units or you go to jail. That usually works, right? Because people don't like going to jail. So that's essentially a standard. But economists are arguing, well, we don't like threatening people with jail. It's not healthy. How do we get firms to voluntarily produce less? Oh, you said it. You just charge them a tax. We know this, right? So when you charge a firm a specific tax, right, it shifts up the marginal cost curve or production, shifts up the supply curve, and you reduce production. So for $1 right here, how big should the tax be? Actually, I can't give you $1 because I still owe one guy in the front row $4, and I only have $4. How about glory? How big do you think the tax should be so we go from A to B? You're a winner. Give me your full name. Last name. All right. So Zachariah here, the world is listening on iTunes here right now, has answered this question as well as anybody has ever answered this question. So the tax here, maybe we should change its name from Pigouvian tax to the Zach tax. But what he said is, well, if you want them to produce this, just make sure that the new supply curve looks exactly like the social marginal cost curve. So just charge a tax, right? So charge a tax, and let that tax be big enough so that the supply curve shifts up exactly to the new social marginal cost curve. right? So this is now the firm's marginal cost aggregated across all firms plus the tax. So what Pigou said is, well, the firms don't internalize the marginal external cost of their activities, so the way we make them internalize it is we simply charge them the marginal external costs in the amount of a tax, right? So all you do, and what Pigouvian taxation does is, it simply figures out what's the marginal external cost at the optimal output level, and then you charge firms a specific tax in exactly that amount, and through this tax, you don't have to tell firms to produce B units, but they will find it profit maximizing to do so, right? So internalize the externality through a tax, the ZAC tax. I like that a lot. I'm going to use that again, all right? So that's it for today. I will see you again on Tuesday. We're going to do cap and trade, and we're going to do public goods, and then we're done with market failures.